Today, we are diving into a pretty brutal story from the world of consumer brands. We're going to look at the great consumer crash of 2025 and figure out how some of the biggest, most powerful companies out there were brought to their knees.
And listen, these aren't some small, obscure companies we're talking about. These are household names. Brands you, me, all of us probably have in our homes or use every single day. I'm talking about the car you might be driving, or even the burrito you grabbed for lunch.
So that's the big question, right? How did these absolute market darlings fall so far, so incredibly fast? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was this powerful, kind of perfect storm of different forces all hitting at once. Okay, let's get into it.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We're looking at three major themes that just collided. First up, what we're calling the Great Consumer Squeeze. Then we'll get into the post-pandemic hangover. And finally, we'll see what happens when brands lose their way. After all that, we'll wrap it up with the biggest takeaways from 2025.
So our first theme, it's really all about the economy. It's simple, you know? When regular people have less cash in their pockets and borrowing money gets super expensive, that fun spending is the very first thing to get cut. And that pressure, well, it created some serious pain for some huge companies.
And this squeeze hit pretty much everywhere. We're talking used cars, home appliances, even restaurants and casinos. It was widespread. Let's look at a few examples to see exactly how this played out in the real world. First up, CarMax, the giant of used car sales. They saw their performance just absolutely crater in 2025. I mean, the drop in their value was nothing short of staggering.
Yeah, look at that number, a 52.4% decline in a single year. That's more than half of the company's value just gone. So what on earth happened?
It really was a perfect storm. On one side, you had sky-high interest rates, which meant car loans just became way too expensive for a lot of their customers. At the exact same time, the value of all the cars sitting on their lots was dropping like a rock, so that just crushed their profits. People either put off buying a car altogether, or they went for much older, cheaper options. Okay, next, let's talk about Whirlpool, because that same economic squeeze that slammed the car lot, it found its way right into our kitchens and laundry rooms.
You can really see the domino effect here. Insanely high mortgage rates basically froze the entire housing market. And, well, if people aren't moving, they're not buying new refrigerators, new dishwashers, new washing machines. The demand for everything Whirlpool makes just dried up.
Now, you might think a place like Chipotle would be pretty safe in a tough economy, right? But nope, even they felt the pinch, dropping over 36%. And the reason why is really a classic lesson in economics.
See, for years, Chipotle just kept raising its prices and people kept paying. It seemed like they could charge anything. But in 2025, they finally hit a wall. As they kept hiking prices to cover their own costs, customers started saying, you know what? I can get a cheaper lunch somewhere else. The big takeaway here is that even for a super loved brand, there is a limit to how much you can charge. All right, on to our second big theme. This is the inevitable correction after the, let's face it, bizarre spending we all did during the pandemic. What goes up must come down. And for a lot of those COVID-era winners, the party was officially over. This slide really captures it perfectly with two totally different companies. On the left, you've got Deckers, who owns Hoka and UGG. Their pandemic fashion boom just stopped on a dime. And on the right, you have Pool Corporation. They were riding that let's fix up our backyard wave until it totally crashed when homeowners started cutting back on big expenses.
And if we look closer at Deckers, that drop was just brutal, almost 51%. The whole chunky shoe trend that had been driving their growth started to cool off, and retailers who were already swimming in stuff they bought during the boom just slammed the brakes on new orders.
This post-pandemic hangover also slammed the world of electronics. I mean, think about it. We all bought new laptops, new webcams, new TVs during lockdown. By 2025, that whole upgrade cycle was just done, and Best Buy really felt it. Right, there were no hot, must-have new gadgets to get people excited. And with money being tight, people decided to spend what they had on travel and experiences, not on another new device. The demand just wasn't there anymore.
And now for our third and final theme. You know, a tough economy, it's like a stress test. It has a way of exposing all the hidden cracks and weaknesses in a company's strategy. And for some of these brands, their own mistakes were just as damaging as what was happening in the economy. And here, we've got three giants who really stumbled. Not just because of the economy, but because of their own issues with competition, with staying relevant, or with corporate focus.
Lululemon's fall from grace was particularly stunning, down over 52%. That is a shocking turnaround for a brand that seemed invincible for like a decade. So, what went so wrong?
Well, it was kind of a triple whammy. First, new aggressive competitors like Aloe and Vuori started stealing their customers. Second, they had a major fashion miss with their main product, their leggings. And third, to get rid of all that extra inventory, they had to do something they almost never do: put stuff on sale. And that really damaged that premium, exclusive feeling that was so core to their brand.
This comparison is fascinating. You have Tesla and VF Corp, and both underperformed, but for completely different internal reasons. Tesla got dragged into a price war. Demand for EVs started to cool off, and investors got worried about CEO distraction. Meanwhile, VF Corp was dealing with a huge brand crisis at Vans, which just couldn't seem to connect with Gen Z anymore, all while struggling under this mountain of debt.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground, from economic pressure to bad strategy. So what are the big lessons here? What can we pull from this whole consumer crash? Let's get to the takeaways. So, what did we learn? First, that pricing power isn't infinite. That's the lesson Chipotle learned the hard way. Second, those wild, crazy trends from the pandemic, they're over. Things are back to normal. Third, brand loyalty is incredibly fragile. When wallets get tight, people will shop around. And finally, and this one is so important, a company's own strategy is just as critical as the economy. You can't just blame everything on the outside world.
So all of this really leaves us with one big question, looking forward. The pressures we saw tear through the market in 2025, they haven't gone away. So as you look at the brands you know and love, you gotta ask yourself, which giant is gonna be the next to fall?